was the doctor, not the patient. You know those erectile dysfunction treatments that used to be on billboards all over? Longer sex now, etc. Well, as is often joked about, those treatments advise you to go to hospital if it lasts longer than 4 hours. Guy came in, having used those treatments, having had an erection for maybe 6 or 8 hours. His penis was purple, not purple helmeted warrior of love purple, but more holding your breath until you pass out purple. Also very painful for the guy. We called the urology registrar to ask him to come and look, and for advice on what to do in the meantime. His answer? Take a large gauge needle on a big syringe, stick it right into his glans penis and suck out as much blood as you can. Then my shift ended. I did not stick around to watch that one. So I get a text from a guy I work with at 1 AM saying, "Hey, I won't be able to make it in tomorrow." Naturally I asked why, so he says, "I'm in the hospital, it's really embarrassing." I press and ask what happened, and are you okay? Turns out he was having some hard sex with his girlfriend and went back a little too far, and when he went to go back and he missed the entrance to the cave and hit in between her cooter and thigh, bending his noodle in half. I didn't believe him at first, but after some research I found out that it is real. He ended up having to get emergency surgery and was out for 2 weeks. So yay, to sum it up, my coworker broke his cock. Not a patient but an ER doctor. Have seen several injuries and sexual misadventures. Common things are sex toys, Coke bottles or vegetables stuck up people's butts. As I tell everyone after I get it out, I don't care what you stick up your butt, but use something with a flange at the base. For example, use a dildo with fake balls on the end, not just a straight rod. It acts as a stopper and prevents it from getting sucked up and stuck up your butt. Less common things but not super rare. Priapisms. Almost always because some dude decided he wanted to have a really awesome night and took 3 or 4 Viagra. Now he has a boner that won't go down, and I'm explaining what a dorsal penile block is to him. When he looks really uncomfortable at the idea of me putting a needle in his genital, I explain that this is just to numb it, so I can stick an even bigger needle in his wee-wee to aspirate out blood. Point of reference, I numb you with a 25 gram, I aspirate with an 18 gram. Size chart for people who haven't seen them. More rare, broken penises. Generally it's a guy on the bottom, girl on top, and he pops out for a second before she comes down hard and he jams into her perineum instead of her vagina or anus. Blood vessels rupture and the penis fills with blood and looks almost exactly like an eggplant. Once you've seen one, you know what happened. I don't fix those. Those go see urology and go to the operating room. Not fun. Other fun things. Penis rings that got stuck. Small toys stuck in the vagina. Sounding misadventures. Those go straight to urology. Google it if you don't know what it is. Implantable penis pump malfunctions, etc. There's more, but that covers the bread and butter of what I see in this category. Was doing the deed. No thrills, nothing fancy. Afterwards we're sitting on the couch and I feel crampy, so I go into the bathroom, and I sit. That's when I have the most painful cramp of all time. My boyfriend comes in to see me full-blown hysterical tears. Calls my mom, who's an ER nurse whose motto as a child was, "No bones sticking out or gushing blood, you're fine." She drives down immediately and takes me to the ER. That's when I panic, because if this cold-hearted nurse thinks I need to go pronto, it's serious. When we get there it's slow enough that I pretty much immediately see a doctor, who just happens to be my mom's favorite coworker. Awesome. I then try to explain why it hurts and how it happened when my mom blurts out she was having sex. The doctor didn't flinch much, but I sure did. I wanted to die. Thankfully the embarrassment didn't last long because they gave me amazing painkillers. Long story short, I had sex, had an ovarian cyst burst, horrifyingly painful, went to be ER doctor and my mom were buddies. Good times. I had really terrible cramps a few times after sex, enough that I had to take pain pills just to sleep. The pain was gone in the next morning both times, and weirdly it didn't happen every time we had sex. I went to the gyno and even had an ultrasound done, but no one could see anything. Fast forward a few months later, one night my boyfriend and I got kind of drunk while watching Baywatch, and decided to keep a good night going with some tipsy sex. The cramping started midway through and didn't let up. Within minutes I was crouched naked on the toilet. No idea why I thought it would help, and couldn't move. My boyfriend called an Uber in lieu of an ambulance. I managed to get myself dressed despite puking every few seconds into a plastic mixing bowl. The poor driver didn't want to take me, since he probably thought I was drunk, and sat there arguing with my boyfriend that I needed an ambulance. I blurted out, "Get me to a hospital now," and he slammed on the gas. That argumentative angel got me there in less than 5 minutes. It turns out an ovarian cyst had burst and torn my uterine wall, so I was bleeding internally. I had to have laparoscopic surgery to remove and cauterize the cyst. Those things are no joke. My only regret is never learning what size fruit or bull I could compare it to. I'm also eternally grateful to my boyfriend to being too tired for tent sex the week before, or I would have been bleeding internally at the far end of the Grand Canyon. Emergency physician here. Have seen some stuff. 2 patients wheeled in on the same stretcher. One is a late 40s butch female. The other is a mid-20s lipstick lesbian. They've been playing and fisting, and while the younger woman was inside the other, the older woman orgasmed so hard it broke the younger woman's hand at the wrist. The protruding bones then perforated the walls of the vagina and she was unable to extricate her hand. The poor woman was wrist deep and both were in pain. I let the trauma surgeons and ED residents fight over that one. I've seen the broken penis 4 times. Twice this year, strangely enough. Also had to give a few too many intracavernosal injections of neofapriapism. Things inserted rectally that cannot be removed at home. We had a guy who would put toy cars, Coke glass bottles, and later a clearly Canadian bottle, because he was excited it was back on the market. I'm uncircumcised, and I tore my frenulum having sex with a girl one time. It's the little flap of skin that attaches the bottom of the foreskin to the bottom of the head of the penis. Just like the little flap of skin between your lips and gums. The worst part of it was that I didn't notice during sex. I pulled out to come on her stomach, and a torrent of blood and cum spurted everywhere. I looked down and saw it and just awkwardly said, "Houston, we have a problem." First we thought that she had gotten her period, which was sorta mortifying for both of us. But after a quick inspection, I realized that I was squirting blood out of my penis. I don't know if any of the rest of you have ever squirted blood out of your penises, but turns out that we've got millions of years of evolution telling us to protect that little banger at all costs. So I was freaking the hell out. Turns out the doctors can't do anything about it. I put Vaseline on it and waited weeks for it to heal up. It never did. Fully. Now it's significantly tighter and weaker than it used to be. Now every time I have sex there's a part of my brain that's terrified that it'll happen again. My wife had just had surgery to remove an ovarian cyst, so after a week of abstinence we were having sex. I felt like I hit something wrong, but she said to not worry about it. Fast forward a couple of hours, and she's in a lot of pain. She thinks there might have been a complication with the surgery and us having sex might have caused something bad. Off we go to the ER. One ultrasound later, the intravaginal one with that huge wand. The doctor tells us that she had a bruise on the inside of her vagina. Essentially, I beat her vagina up. I remembered the moment, and I asked her about it. She said, "Well, it did hurt, but I didn't want you to stop." I had a hysterectomy in February this year and was told no sexual contact for 6 weeks. I kicked my then boyfriend out of my apartment in March. In April, right after my 6-week follow-up where I got cleared for sex again, I got lonely, but did not want a relationship, so I hit up an old pal of mine for a one-night stand, because I was in the mood for a terrible decision. Things were going well, until he noticed I was bleeding, and then it started to hurt. Very bad. I went home and laid on my heating pad, trying to rest, and called the doctor's office as soon as they opened the next morning. They scheduled me an appointment for a few hours later, so I assumed no big deal and tried to push through the pain while getting dressed. Now, I'd just had a sweaty, nasty one-night stand less than 8 hours prior, plus I'd started leaking this weird clear fluid during the night. Genuinely thought I'd peed the bed until I stood up and felt it keep gushing. So, naturally, being the prim and proper woman I am, decided to shower first. Nope, in too much pain to stand for a shower. F it, I thought, I'll just take a bath. Despite being clean, I was in so much pain I couldn't get out of the bathtub. Had to call a friend of mine with a spare key to come get me out and dressed and drive me to the doctor. So, I get to the doctor, finally, and he's like, "Yup, we're gonna go ahead and wheel you down to the operating room now." Turns out, that weird clear fluid I kept leaking was abdominal fluid. My one-night stand, hung like a goddamn bull, had penetrated through the hysterectomy stitches, tearing my vaginal cuff and leaving a gaping wound from my vagina into my abdomen. And by bathing instead of showering, I essentially filled my abdomen with bath water. By the time I got to the OR, I had a 103 fever and, I think, it gets kinda blurry here, they said I was turning septic. I had about 5 minutes to call my mom to let her know I was about to have surgery, and demanded from the entire staff that my mother could not know it was caused by sex. I woke up a few hours later feeling great, morphine is amazing, and wanted to go home. However, I got myself a nice little hospital stay for 5 days while they kept me on IV and antibiotics, because my dumbass had to take a bath before going to the doctor and letting him see the filthy girl I really am. Mum thinks that I just tore a few stitches from going too hard at the gym after the hysterectomy, and I intend to keep it that way. Last week, I had my final follow-up appointment from my vaginal cuff surgery, and I'm now cleared to have sex again. But I'm not sure if I'm ever going to, because that was scary as hell. Not so much an injury, but the treatment and aftermath did hurt a lot. Condom came off inside me, and we didn't notice until after we were done. Both of us tried to look, or feel, for it and couldn't find any trace. I ended up in the ER and the doctor tried removing it with tongs, but it was apparently wedged right up in my cervix and the tongs couldn't reach. So this doctor with hands like Mr. Burns had to lube me up and get in there with his hands to yank it out. It hurt so much and I was completely mortified, as my partner was sat next to me watching and was horrified. I now have a phobia of that happening again and it makes sex with condoms really awkward for me. Doug was my 4th year college roommate, along with a couple of other people. He was a strange fellow. I became accustomed to broken beer bottles in the floor, bizarre pornography in the VCR, feces in places you wouldn't expect it, and frequent visits by the cops into the emergency room. One night, Doug is being visited by his girlfriend from out of town. They spend most of their time tucked away in Doug's bedroom, doing God knows what. Doug sneaks out and doesn't return for several hours. When he comes back, he has an emergency room bracelet on. After some grilling, he gives up the story. He and his girlfriend are looking for something that might work as a makeshift penis ring. Nothing around except a large padlock. So, she snaps the padlock around his penis and balls. When it becomes clear that it isn't going to work like they thought it would, they go looking for the key. Nowhere to be found. Most of us would have thought about the location of the key before putting it around our junk. So, Doug heads off to the emergency room to get it removed, afraid of losing his giblets to restriction of blood flow. The procedure takes several hours because the doctor has to parade in every other doctor, nurse, intern, and possibly janitor to check out the moron with the padlock stuck around his nuts. Also, they have to take frequent breaks during the sawing off due to the heat that keeps accumulating from the friction and burning his genitals. I had to drive a friend to the emergency room after he broke his penis during a house party. I was already the scheduled DD for my friends and apparently one of them snuck off with this girl. They were doing the good old reverse cowgirl like any other young bucks would, and she ended up zigging where she should have zagged and kinda did a 90-degree body talk. To his explanation, it sorta just popped and he threw her off him and screamed bloody murder. He tossed on some shorts commando style and told me to drive him to the hospital like now. Drop what I'm doing. Get in the car. You're the only one sober. Let's go. Let's go. Oh, and the girl came along. Her name was Amanda, and she was pretty chill. So it was me driving two barely clothed 20-year-olds in my car to the local hospital 20 minutes away with my dude holding his penis in the backseat and Amanda just consoling him, rubbing his back, making sure he's okay. Telling him, it's going to be alright, you're gonna be fine, like he hadn't just fractured his penis. So, we make it to the ER and he just hobbles in and says he broke his penis. Please fix it. And they took him in and I was just alone with this girl I had met that night, just waiting for the prognosis. And around an hour later they tell us that he's having emergency surgery because he suffered a severe penile fracture and tore his urethra as well, and basically told us to go home, call someone to pick him up that night. Dude was under the knife and discharged the next day, penis intact and pried only somewhat. Oh, and I also had to call his parents to let them know that their son was having emergency penis surgery and to pick him up in the morning. Could or could not be a fun call at 12 at night, depending on the perspective. They ended up dating for a while after that too. One time I was getting a handy from my girl and she decides she wants to use some lube. She goes and grabs what she thinks is Askreddit, pumps a few shots into her hand, and gets back into the game. It feels absolutely amazing, but I noticed that it smelled a little more chemically than what it should have been. We finish things up and go to bed shortly after. In the morning I wake up to take a piss and feel a slight sting. Turns out the sting was one of many pieces of dried penis skin that were falling off. It seriously looked like lizard skin. What she had used the night before was not lube, but some industrial strength soap I had taken from one of the labs I worked in at Stanford Medical School. Chunks of skin continued to fall off for the next 2 days and I could barely touch it for a week because of how bad it stung. I didn't have to go to the ER, but I certainly learned my lesson. While I was taking EMT classes, a paramedic was telling us a story about a couple in a hotel trying some kinky stuff. Man calls 911 because his pregnant wife's face was turning blue. Ambulance comes, examine the pregnant wife, asks the husband what happened and he refused to explain, claiming she randomly started turning blue. Wife transported to the hospital. Hospital nurses ask the man. He still refuses to talk, claiming she randomly started turning blue. Doctor comes in pissed. After a few tests he is confused as to what the hell is going on. Doctor yells at the husband demanding to know the whole story. Husband and pregnant wife were getting kinky. He took an empty glass bottle, maybe a beer bottle or Coke bottle, and sticks it up her vagina. In the end the wife died of an air embolism and baby rescued via C-section. Not me. I was hanging out with a nurse friend of mine at her place. She works at the OR and I asked if she'd seen crazy stuff that had to do with private parts. She told me about this dude who had a ring in his penis hole. Not on his penis. Inside his penis, where pee comes from. Anyway, it was as thick as a wedding band, and the doctor on duty was debating on whether to amputate his penis or not. Fortunately for him they were able to bring in a tiny circular saw and cut the ring then take it out. Gives me nightmares thinking about it. Friend of mine was peeing in his backyard. His dog thought the stream of pee was something to play with and went for a bite. Had to drive himself to the ER and said his vision was blacking out from the pain. He almost had to have plastic surgery to get it fixed, but 6 weeks of no sexual activity and it had healed enough that it wasn't required. As soon as he was on pain meds he messaged me saying, "Have I got a story for you?"